Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Justin Mogilski, and this is Psych 101, Introduction to Psychology. The first thing that I teach any of my students is that when someone gets in front of you and says that they're going to be teaching you something for an extended period of time, you should probably figure out what their credentials are. What qualifies them to lecture to you about this topic? I'm going to give you two lines of evidence. One, I'm a doctor. I've earned a PhD. What that means is I spent a considerable amount of time training in a very particular domain of knowledge. Having a doctorate does not mean that you know everything. In fact, quite the opposite. It makes you keenly aware of what you do not know. There's a vastness to human knowledge, and I only have access, any one of us only has access to a very small sliver of it. Number two, though, what I've done, so I am a professor, I teach, it's something that I enjoy incredibly, but part of my job is not just that I teach, but I have to perform scholarship or original research. To do that, what I do is I actually collect data from people. I formulate hypotheses based on prior theory. I then create surveys, experiments, collect data from people, both in South Carolina and throughout the world, to test those hypotheses, gather data to perform statistical analyses, test the hypotheses, write up the results. I then submit those results to what's called a peer-reviewed journal. And from there, my work gets vetted for quality by my peers. Those of you who are not familiar with what a peer-reviewed journal is, you take the data that you've collected, you submit it somewhere, and these are other people within the field that you've collected this data who are not motivated necessarily to see you publish. They rip apart your methods, they question how you've collected that data, they question how you've interpreted that data, and hopefully after this very long and arduous process, it gets published somewhere. So what I have done is I've collected data, I've tested these kinds of hypotheses for a good long while, and I've published a number of peer-reviewed articles on very broadly relationship science, human mating, the things that people do within romantic, sexual, and intimate relationships. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sampler of where I published and what kinds of topics I have published on. Very broadly, I've looked at things like mate poaching, which is when if you are single, instead of seeking someone who is currently single as well to start a romantic relationship, you go after someone who's currently in a romantic relationship. I've looked at the various reasons that people dissolve their relationships, why people break up. And this is a particular example published back in 2016, titled Staying Friends with an Ex, Sex and Dark Personality Traits Predict Motivations for Post-Relationship Friendship. One of the unique contributions of this particular study is we wanted to know when people break up and then they stay friends with their ex, why do they do it? Prior to this research, there hadn't been really a documented, comprehensive list of reasons that people stayed friends with their exes. So what we did was we asked people, well, why do you stay friends with an ex? We took these many reasons that were ACT nominated to us. We then created a measure that people could fill out where we identified about 7 different reasons. And I want to highlight a couple of them. One, things like reliability and sentimentality. That is, they wanted to stay friends with an ex because they were an important part of the person's life. They had an ongoing friendship together. They were someone who they had shared secrets with, someone who they leaned on for emotional support, and they didn't want to give that up. And that was the most common reason. The second, unfortunately most common reason, were what we labeled pragmatic reasons. And these were things like, well, they had a lot of money, or they had a car and they were capable of driving me to work. Then there were some other reasons like, well, we shared a social network. That is, we had friends together, and so we didn't want to make things awkward in that friendship group. Or we had children together, and we wanted to stay amiable. We wanted to stay friendly for the sake of the children. And then also one of the reasons that popped up was I wanted to continue to have sex with this person. So we identified these different reasons, and then we looked at some of the predictors, some of the things that predict whether you report that you've stayed friends with an ex for one of those particular reasons. And we examined 2 characteristics. One, whether a person reported being male or female. And then also these traits that are called dark personality traits. Very broadly, these refer to a person's willingness to exploit another person for personal gain. That is, are you willing to do something shitty to another person if it personally benefits you? So we found a couple of interesting findings here. One, that first off, men, unsurprisingly, perhaps are more willing to stay friends with an ex in order to continue to have sex with that person compared to women. Everyone was more likely to report staying friends with an ex for those reliability, sentimentality. They were there as a friend. They wanted to keep them as a friend. But in terms of these dark personality traits, so what happens is we can measure these traits using an inventory, and people score relatively higher or lower on that trait. That is, they're more willing to exploit other people for personal gain, or they're less willing. People who reported greater willingness to do that were more likely to report staying friends with an ex for those pragmatic reasons. That is, that person was simply useful to them. They had money, they could fix stuff, they could drive them places, and also, again, to have sex with their partner. So revealing some of the motivations behind why people stay friends with their ex-partners. Aside from looking at romantic relationships, part of romance is competition, is attraction, not just between people who are looking to get into a relationship, but often conflict among those who may be seeking a similar partner. And so I've looked at different types of conflict, fighting, and what happens after fights that you might observe. Now, if anyone's gone onto YouTube and you've just searched for street fights, you'll find tons on there. If you look up these videos, you'll see people who have recorded actual fights, usually between men, where they wail on one another. They get into these really deep, sometimes bloody fist fights. And then afterwards, they almost always engage in a particular behavior, shaking hands. This is something that you see after many different types of conflict. You'll see this in sporting events. What happens is you go out on the field, you play that game, and no matter who wins or who loses, one of the first things that coaches often encourage their players to do is go to the other team and shake their hand. Now, what this is described as is it's good sportsmanship, right? You're showing respect for the other team. But in terms of the function of that behavior, what it does is it makes it less likely that in the future, if, say, there are tensions left over from the conflict, you've got this lingering resentment towards one another, what shaking hands can do is it can make it less likely that will occur, that future conflict will occur in the future. That is, you want to stay on good terms with one another. So the reason that coaches often encourage good sportsmanship is it's not arbitrary. It's to make sure that in the future you stay on good terms with these people that you'll continue to have an interaction with. Now, this isn't something that you just see in humans. Non-human primates do this as well. I actually had the fortune to work in a primate lab several years ago, where I got to observe baboons. Baboons are these kind of very large primates, and they're very what's called sexually dimorphic. That is, the differences between males and females within the species is quite noticeable. And one of the big differences is that the males tend to be much larger, more muscular, and when housed with other males, they tend to get aggressive. They tend to get territorial. And what you can often see is if two males are within a shared enclosure, they'll often get into fights. It might be bloody. They might pull hair out from one another. They hit one another, and then they go their separate ways. But what you usually see afterwards is that over time, one of them will come up to the other and usually start to groom. That is, start to do that where they kind of run their fingers through their hand, through their hair, they pick out parasites, they do a favor, they do something that feels good for the other baboon, and then hopefully that baboon will reciprocate. And the idea there is these individuals will have to continue to interact across time. And so it would be a good thing to make up after that conflict, show them that they still respect them, that they still want to get along. So humans do this, non-human primates do this as well. I've also looked at what are called morphometric cues of mate quality. Now that's a lot, but morphometric just means that it has to do with the shape or the style of the body or the face. And these are cues of what are called mate quality, that is, characteristics that one would look for in a potential sexual or romantic partner. What I've done is I've published work looking at the relative importance of 3 different characteristics to people's perceptions of others' faces, that is, especially the faces of potential romantic or intimate partners. And we identified 3 traits that seem to be quite important. We compared the relative importance of 3 different traits. One, I've already mentioned this, something called sexual dimorphism. That is the degree to which a person's face looks prototypically male or female. There are certain traits that systematically differ between men's and women's faces. For example, men tend to have, I'll try to orient myself in the camera here, men tend to have relatively wider jawbones. That is, the distance from particularly this point to this point tends to be larger among men, and I should say very broadly, males within a species compared to females. This is true, again, of humans and non-humans as well. Men tend to have more facial hair. Men's eyebrows tend to be somewhat thicker than women's. Men's eyes tend to be slightly smaller than women's. Now, that is not to say that it's significantly so, but if you actually measure in terms of millimeters, men on average do tend to have smaller eyes. Women tend to have more prominent cheekbones. So that is the degree to which you can kind of detect whether see a person's cheekbones easily. Women are more likely to have that. And the idea is that many of these traits are actually controlled by or influenced by the amount of hormones that an individual is exposed to, both in utero, that is when they were much younger and in the womb, as well as during puberty, which can shape the development of these traits. So we looked at the degree to which people care about these sexually dimorphic cues, compared to also what are called what's called fluctuating asymmetry. That is the degree to which a person's face does not appear perfectly symmetrical. The logic here is that when a person's face is more symmetrical, so everyone's face, basically from very early on, is programmed to be fairly symmetrical. That is, DNA codes for what's called bilateral symmetry. And this is, again, true for humans. You'll see this among other species as well. Most species have this line that you can draw down the center of the body and fold one half over the other. That's bilateral symmetry. Now, the extent to which you remain symmetrical, though, is dependent on a number of factors, such as how often you've been sick throughout your life, whether you've had any developmental issues growing up, or what are called developmental perturbations, that is, disruption to development. So it's an indicator of generally a person's developmental health. That is, if you are more asymmetrical, you are less symmetrical, that may indicate that you have had a harder time either finding proper nutrition, fighting off disease, etc. And so that could be an underlying cue that one would look for in a potential romantic partner if, say, you were going to pair up with this person for a while, have children with them, and ultimately pass on those qualities to children. Also, color cues to health. And when I say color cues to health, I don't mean skin color tied to things like ethnicity, but rather various levels of pigments within the skin. Turns out there are 3 predominant pigments in a person's skin. There are red pigments that contribute to flushness of the skin. That is when a person blushes. That would be what's called skin blood perfusion. That is how much blood is perfused or distributed within the face at a given time. Also, yellow pigmentations. So yellow pigmentations contribute to, an easy way to think about this is how healthy or glowing a face tends to appear. So someone can be kind of more washed out looking. You'll see this when someone is sick. They tend to have kind of what's called a pallid look to their face. And so having more yellow hues to the skin, this yellow pigmentation, can actually contribute to perceptions of healthiness. And then there are also blue pigmentations, which we don't perceive very easily consciously, but they actually do contribute to our perception of a person's health. Though yellow and red pigmentation seems to be some of the most important for these assessing a potential romantic partner. So we looked at these different characteristics, compared them, And one of the interesting findings that we determined was that people really cared about these sexually dimorphic cues, the degree to which a person appears more male or female, compared to symmetry or color cues to health. And this might suggest that there's something about those underlying levels of hormone that which contribute to sexual dimorphism that are very consequential to people's choices in who they select as a partner, potential romantic partner. Going from there, where I've actually progressed in my research is I now study the intersection between morality and romantic relationships. Morality broadly referring to what we consider right or wrong. One of the earliest studies I looked at at that intersection, at that crossover, are looking at what are called May-December romances. This is kind of an old-timey term. If no one's heard this, I don't blame you, but May-December romances refer to those in which someone who is much older is paired up with someone who is much younger. So I think colloquial terms, things like, a gold digger, right? Someone who is a much younger woman who's pairing up with a much older man, or it's kind of strange that women seem to have the derogatory names for these age mismatched things, because you also hear the term a cougar, right? A much older woman with a much younger man. Well, people tend to morally disapprove of these kinds of relationships. That is, compared to an age-matched relationship, age-discrepant relationships, or these May-December romances, tend to be perceived more negatively. And there are a number of reasons that might be the case. One that we tested in this study is we thought that the degree to which a relationship is perceived as transactional, that is, that these two people are together because they are explicitly getting something from one another. That is, maybe the much older men tend to have more social status, they tend to have more money, and so a man is going to have relatively more money when they're older, and men tend to seek women who are relatively younger. And so he may be expecting to get something like sex from a partner, versus a woman who's much younger who gets involved with a male who's much older might be interested in, say, his money or his support of her. So to the degree that the relationship is more transactional, people may judge these relationships as inappropriate, compared to these age match relationships where maybe you can be more certain that people are getting together because they have shared interests, because they have shared life goals and that they're the same stage of life. How we tested this was we looked at people's attitudes towards age-discrepant relationships compared to age-congruent ones, and we looked at the degree to which people's attitudes towards sex work or prostitution helped to explain attitudes towards these May-December romances. And in fact, that's what we found, is that people who were more likely to disapprove of sex work or prostitution were also more likely to disapprove of these of age discrepant relationships, that there was crossover in how that explained moral disapproval of these kinds of relationships. From there, where I've gone is I've started to look at the morality of a particular category of intimate relationship that is becoming more and more popular, called consensual non-monogamy. Those of you who have not heard of this, monogamy refers to romance, a pair bond between just two individuals. So that is, if you're finding a sexual or romantic partner, you're only establishing that relationship with one other person, and you're doing so exclusively. Consensual non-monogamy includes things like polyamory or swinging or open relationships, where partners agree that they can form these intimate attachments with other people outside of just that pair bond. Now, one of the interesting things about these relationships is these two tend to be relatively more stigmatized. They tend to be more disapproved of compared to monogamy. And yet, when you look at the scientific research on these relationships, they seem to be achieving comparable relationship quality to those who are in monogamous relationships. There seems to be this stigma against these relationships, which we don't quite understand. And so a lot of my current research is looking at the reasons for this stigma. Why do people tend to disapprove of consensually non-monogamous relationships? And in fact, I currently have a grant where I'm collecting data to address this question directly. So this is some of my work. Again, this is the work that I've published in peer-reviewed journals. I've had to collect this data, send it in, and people rip it apart, and it's a very arduous process, but ultimately a very rewarding one, because the ideal is that this is information that has been vetted, and so can be more likely to be trusted, or at least it's more rigorous in how it addresses information about romantic relationships, etc. Aside from all the professional stuff, I want to give you a few personal details about me. Just one thing, I'm a huge nerd. I love video games. I love playing video games. I like board games. For a long time, several years ago, unfortunately, I haven't found a lot of people to do this with, but I used to play Dungeons and Dragons with people. And I'll say, if you ever get the opportunity to play Dungeons and Dragons, I highly encourage it. If you are going through anything in your life, if you need to self-examine yourself, playing D&D and role-playing with other people will help you work through those issues. Don't know what I mean? Give it a try. You'll see. I would not consider myself a Redditor. However, of all the social media sites that exist, of the ones that I care to spend time on, I actually really enjoy Reddit. And the reason is, I think that it's populated by a number, I think it's, on average, I would guess that it's populated by people who are above average in intelligence. And I also just like the particular way in which social media is shared on the site. If you go to Facebook, if you go to Twitter, if you go to most other social media sites, what you have is the option where if you are scrolling through your newsfeed and you see something that you really like, what you can do is you can simply react to it. You can like it, you can get angry, you can cry, you can laugh, etc. There's no option, though, to dislike something, to say, hey, I don't think this belongs here, or I don't really think this is really newsworthy, or something that I want, people should have popping up in their newsfeed. And so Reddit has that. And so whether you see something on Reddit is really a combined total of the upvotes and downvotes that it has received, which I think is just possibly a much more responsible way of consuming social media. We'll talk a little bit about social media in this class as we go on, and some of the benefits and risks of it. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so in a small town called Wind Gap. It's about an hour north of Philadelphia. I went to college at a place called Albright College in Reading. I got my master's at a place called Bucknell, which is in central Pennsylvania. And then I moved to Michigan for about 5 years. For 5 years. I moved to Michigan for about 5 years, that's where I got my PhD. I lived in Pontiac, which is about just northwest of Detroit. So I spent a lot of time in Detroit during those years. Something fun about me, I really hate dressing formally. What you'll see in these recorded videos is generally I'll try to look professional and put together, but I also might wear a black t-shirt. I think the most important thing, and this is my expectation for all my students, is you should be dressing comfortably when you are attempting to learn something. You want as few distractions as possible, and I think that it's important that you're relaxed, that you set aside time to really engage with the material, and you don't necessarily have to worry about how you look. I suppose that's a nice thing about taking an asynchronous online class. If you haven't picked this up already, I actually really enjoy public speaking. I enjoy it not because it is inherently enjoyable to me, but rather that I recognize it's a challenge and it's a puzzle. My puzzle is I have to say something in just the right way that it makes sense to the people that I'm talking to. I have to explain something in a way that really resonates with my audience. And sometimes I accomplish that, sometimes I don't. When I do, though, it's very rewarding. And so I think I've gotten okay at that. I think I've gotten pretty good at that. And so now I actually really enjoy public speaking. I've figured out that puzzle. If you're interested in what wavelength I'm at, typically I drink tea, caffeinated tea. I think that compared to coffee tends to make me too stimulated, overstimulated. My attention actually tends to wander more if I'm overstimulated by coffee compared to tea. Tea is nice, right in the center. Not sweet tea. I realize that's a big faux pas, but I actually find that I drink too much sugar if I drink sweet tea. So unsweetened, caffeinated tea is where I'm at currently. And if you have any troubles with caffeination or feeling tired, you might actually be drinking too much coffee. We'll talk about this when we get to the section on consciousness and drug use, but what happens is if you start drinking too much caffeine, you can become more tolerant to it. So one of the most effective ways to consume caffeine or really any kind of drug is to do so in moderation, such that you do not become physically dependent on it, in this case for stimulation. What I am not. So I have been teaching for more than 10 years at this point. I have a fair amount of experience in it, and of course I have an experience doing research. But what I'm not is, I mean, I kind of have gray hairs going on here. It's kind of hard to see now. What I'm not, though, is someone who's been teaching for decades and decades and decades and decades. And so there may be a lot of questions that you all have of me that I'm not going to address here, that I do not state clearly, or that I do not explain well. If that's the case, I actually encourage you to reach out to me. I'll go over where you can do that, how you can do that, the email address that you can send your questions to get my response. I respond very quickly, but I realize I don't know everything, and I realize that there are things that I would love to address if I could. So I think I'm humble enough to say that I don't know everything, and there's tons of wisdom that I'm lacking. However, what I am is someone who has had experience in psychology, in psychological research for quite some time now. So if any of you are thinking about graduate school, if any of you are thinking about how to apply a degree in psychology, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Give you some pointers about what directions you can take in your career. And of course, I think we'll have fun in this class. There's plenty of good content here. So that's the resource that I am to you. Before I can set you free to look at the first week's set of videos and begin class content, I need to give you a bit of a tutorial. So if you've never used Blackboard before, now if you're accessing this, you've already figured it out. But what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of a tour of Blackboard and how this class is going to be organized so that you have that for yourself. I also need to ask you to complete something called a student information sheet, which I will highlight when we go over Blackboard. And then I want to go over the syllabus and look at what a normal week is going to look like. All right, let me pull up Blackboard. The first thing you're going to notice about my class is that I have pared it down to precisely what you need to know. It's a little bit different because this year, as you've probably realized in your other classes, the university has adopted Blackboard Ultra. So this may look different than what you're used to if you've taken classes here before. But here's what you need to know for this class. There are only two categories really, that matter for you. Content. Everything that you need is under content. You never need to go to calendar. You never need to go to announcements or discussions. There's also the grade book, and the grade book is going to help you to track what your grade looks like. This will always be kept up to date, as you'll see. Sometimes messages will appear here if I send an email out to everybody. If you miss that email, you'll find that email recorded here as well. But if you're checking your email, you'll never have to check this. All right, so let's go to content. How do we navigate this class? Very simple. The first category here is what is due, and this is going to be your lifeline. It's going to tell you exactly what you need to do for each week. So walking into the class, the first set of assignments are going to be due August 26th, so that is next Monday, before 11:59 p.m. So you must turn in all assignments on each Monday before midnight. But if you click on this and you expand it, you'll see it tells you exactly what to do. Watch the 2 lecture videos listed under recorded lectures, and if you've found this video, you're already watching the course introduction. You'll then be asked to complete the chapter 1 history of psychology video, read the chapter 1 section of the textbook, only the material that gets covered in the recorded lectures, because that is what I will be testing on, and then complete and submit the chapter 1 exam, which I'll show you. For the first week, I also want you to complete a student information sheet, which I will show you in a moment. But what I recommend is that for each week, you start at the top and you do these in order. This will give you the best experience moving forward. But once you complete these assignments each week, the next set of assignments is going to open up, and you'll see that that content then becomes available. You go to course schedule. This is a nice shortcut. If you're confused about what is due, what we're going to be going over, it's all right here. This is going to be in the syllabus as well. But briefly, what we're going to be doing in this class is I've divided the class up into 4 units. We're first going to begin looking at psychology as a science, as something that uses the scientific method. And compared to other classes that you may have taken, I'm going to focus on how the scientific method in particular helps with asking questions about the mind and the behavior that it produces. And the argument that I'm going to make is that it uses the scientific method to avoid cognitive bias. That is, we make these systematic errors when we are asking questions about the mind because we're using the mind to ask questions about the mind. And there's a problem in there. We're going to go over that. Once we get a bit of the science and philosophy of psychology under our belts, we're then going to move on to Unit 2, where we'll learn about neurons, learning, and memory, biology. Now, I understand that biology is not everyone's strongest suit, but it's necessary for understanding psychology because your brain, your mind, everything that it produces is the consequence of something natural that exists in the world, namely your brain, your nervous system, your entire nervous system, and how your nervous system interacts with the world around you. So we're going to go into a bit of that. We're going to start at the smallest unit. We'll talk about a neuron, how you string a bunch of neurons together to get a nervous system. We can then learn how, using how neurons connect to one another, we can classically condition, we can operantly condition something through different learning processes. And of course, we record what we've learned to memory. So we're going to go over that in Unit 2. In Unit 3, we'll then get into some real, I think, one of the more fun parts of the class. Here we're going to start talking about subjective experience. And what subjective experience is really your personal experience of the world. So we're going to start looking at how do you take these nuts and bolts of the nervous system and create this experience of being alive, being a person, feeling things. And that's what sensation and perception will be about. We'll then have our fall break for a week, and then we'll get into consciousness. And here, I love consciousness. We'll get into a little bit of the philosophy of consciousness. What is consciousness? What does it mean to be conscious? But then we're going to focus in on sleep, because it turns out a lot of people have trouble with sleep, and so I have some very practical advice. And then we'll also talk about drugs. We'll talk about how addiction works. We'll talk about what different types of drugs exist, what one can expect if you were to put a certain drug into your body and let it interact with your nervous system, etc. Then from there, Unit 4, how we'll close out the class, is we're going to get into a bit of human development. So at this point, we'll know a lot about how the mind works. Here, we're going to study how does that change across time. How does your mind differ between when you're an infant versus when you're an adult? So we'll talk about DNA, a bit of maturation. We'll get into a little bit of biology again. We'll then talk about cognitive development. And then finally, we'll end everything with psychological disorders. Once we know how the mind works, we can start to understand what happens when the mind doesn't quite work as we want it to, when it gets in the way, when the way our mind works perhaps introduces harm into our lives, and how we can deal with that. Then at the very end, there's a comprehensive exam, which I'll talk about. That's going to be due on a particular date. But notice on the right side here, the big thing I want you to, what you're going to use the course schedule for the most is to keep track of what is due. And so you'll see next class, although this is also listed in the what is due part of Blackboard, you'll see that you can check very quickly, oh, exam 1 is due, exam 2 is due, also the first hypothesis is due, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so use this as your quick guide. Moving on, let's get into, okay, syllabus and course docs. This is the category. If you're looking for something, you're not sure where it is, it's probably here in syllabus and course docs. First, you're going to get the syllabus. I will go over this in a moment. The textbook is right here. This is just a link. So this is open source. You don't have to buy your textbook. Just click on this link. It'll bring up the book for you, free of access. And there you go. Technology FAQ. If you have any troubles with technology, whether it's accessing your email address or getting onto Blackboard, or your computer just isn't acting right, I would first suggest using this resource. This is something that the Student Retention Committee at the university put together to help students to troubleshoot any kind of basic errors that they might encounter and what to do about it. So be sure to browse this FAQ. Ultimately, if you're having troubles, you should email the help desk, the IT help desk at USC Salkehatchie. They're quite responsive, so you can rely on them. The Opportunity Scholars Program. This is a program that offers various student services to those who qualify: individual tutoring, advising, workshops. There are student activities and cultural events that they host. You do get access to computer labs and other resources that other students do not get if you are not part of the Opportunity Scholars Program. So one, at least, very practical reason to enroll. It doesn't cost anything. And certain people who qualify will get financial grant assistance. So you can click this link right here, check out their webpage, read about them, and pretty easily apply. I highly suggest you do that, even if you're not yet thinking you might need these services. It's good to have on record. So please do that. The student information sheet. This is just, I want to learn a little bit about you. I try to tailor my class to who my students are. So if you click on this, it'll take you to a survey. It'll ask you, what's your name, what's your major, why are you taking this class, what do you hope to get from it? This is going to help me to adjust. So if many of you are nursing majors, I'm going to focus more on content that would be relevant to them. Or, well, to a certain degree. I'm going to make sure content applies to everybody, but I can slightly adjust the examples that I give, the points that I make, given what students' interests are. So please fill out this sheet by the end of the first week. There is a research participation component to this class. So if you click under research participation, you're going to see a handout here. This describes everything in exhausting detail. But very quickly, by the end of the semester, you are going to be expected to complete 2 lab studies and 2 online studies. Now, the online studies you'll see right here under this folder. The links are here. All you have to do for these is go in, choose a study that you qualify for. So for all of them, you must be 18 years of age or older. So if you are not, you will have to complete alternative assignments, which I'll get to in a second. But otherwise, check the requirements. If you meet the requirements, all you do is you click on one of these links. It'll then usually be a survey of some sort. You'll be asked to complete some tasks, answer some questions about yourself. Then at the very end, when you submit your responses, you will get a code that you can send to me, and then I can give you credit for participating. So you will have to do 2 of these studies, any of them, by the end of the semester, before the comprehensive exam is due. You also have to complete lab studies. The lab study sign-up. So lab studies are performed by Dr. Gottsman, one of the other psychology professors. When she is going to have her lab up and running, depends. It's usually a few weeks into the semester. There will be an announcement about it. When she starts, I will send you an email, and then you will use this link to sign up to participate in those lab studies. There'll be more instructions as we get closer in time, but there's a Walterboro sign-up sheet and an Allendale sign-up sheet, depending on which one would be closer for you. If you can't participate or you don't want to participate for whatever reason, I cannot coerce you to participate in research. So we have these alternative assignments that you can complete. The instructions are completely here. If you open up this folder, you'll see the readings that you can complete and turn in for the credit. If you have any questions about that, let me know. There are optional readings for this class, readings that I will mention during lecture, but that I don't require you to read, but they're still interesting, and you might want to know more. I put those readings here under optional readings. For Chapter 7, the Learning chapter, there will be worksheets. This is where those worksheets will be. And then when the comprehensive exam rolls around, there will be a study guide that I will distribute. It's not available yet. I don't want to spoil what's going to happen in this class, but you'll have access to that study guide when the time comes. All right. So this is syllabus and course docs. Everything, again, this is the grab bag. If you're not sure where something is, syllabus and course docs. Recorded lectures. This is how you access lectures for each week. You've already accessed the course introduction, but these are going to open up at the end as each week begins. Pretty straightforward. One note, part of this class is participation, and one of the ways in which I judge participation is whether you have watched these videos. Turns out Blackboard has some nice ways of tracking whether students access the links and watch the videos. So please do that. That will reflect in your final participation grade if you do not watch the videos. Of course, it's very difficult to do well if you don't. Hypotheses and proposals. I will explain these in a moment, but for this class, there will be two types of assignments outside of exams. You'll be writing hypotheses. We are going to identify a question that you have about how the mind works. And then you're going to run through the process of formally proposing some variables that you could measure to test that hypothesis, designing your own study. And then in the proposal, you're going to follow up on one of your hypotheses, and you are going to actually write a research proposal where you describe an experiment that you might perform to test that hypothesis that you've created. So like I said, we'll get into that in a moment, but I'm going to give some tips and guidelines in one of the lecture videos. The slides for that for those tips can be found here in case you want to access them. And then when you're submitting your hypotheses and proposals, you can submit them here. Exams, this is where you will access exams each week. And then I would like you to do this right now as you are watching this video. At the very end of Blackboard, there is a student attendance quiz. You literally just have to click on this. It'll say, I have shown up for class, and that's it. And that makes sure that the university knows that you've attended class at least once, which is important for a variety of reasons. So please complete this now as you are watching the video. You can pause it, you can wait, or you can just open it and keep going. All right, very good. Like I said, you do have this grade book here. Everything here will be correctly calculated. So this works. You'll see that all the individual grades are listed here for every exam and assignment, but then it also calculates your average for hypotheses and proposals and exams, and then the weighted final average before you do your research participation, and then after you do your participation. As long as there is a grade entered for one of these assignments, this grade book will be giving you the correct grade for the class. All right, so you can use this to track your grade, and you should. Please let me know if you are checking it and anything looks odd or incorrect. All right, very good. Let's then move on to the syllabus. So some of this is going to be redundant with what I've already said, but again, so this syllabus, this is going to be your contract with me. That's my name, that's the course section, email address. This is the best way to contact me. There is a feature in Blackboard to send a message directly to me through Blackboard. That tends to be somewhat unreliable. I don't get notifications about those emails, those messages. So please use my email address and send your email to me directly. My office hours, because this is an online class, I don't have any in-person ones for all of you, but send me an email and I'd be happy to schedule an appointment. I like to meet with students. I like to help. I want to make sure everyone's doing well. Use me as a resource. This is the course description. The required text, like I said, is open source. You can access it right there. Some of the outcomes and objectives, you can read that on your own time, but here, grades. This is what everyone cares about. There is a participation component, 10% of the course grade. It's earned by watching the recorded lecture videos uploaded to Blackboard and participating in assignments. Exams. Each chapter concludes with an exam. Some chapters have 2 exams because there's a lot of content. In total, exams are going to be worth 40% of the course grade. They'll be administered online and be due 1 week from when they are available. So again, always due before 11:59, before midnight, each Monday. The comprehensive exam, this will be worth 20% of your course grade. This exam will contain multiple choice questions, just like the regular exams, but these questions will come from any chapter, and there will be a lot more questions on them than a normal exam, which is why why this one exam is worth 20%. Like I said, I will prepare you for this by giving you a study guide, but please, once you learn something, don't forget it. You're going to need it. You'll find that this class is set up in such a way that it's difficult to forget what you've learned. Everything builds on itself. Hypotheses, these are worth 10% of the course grade. Each assignment will be a short, 1 paragraph. It's 4 sentences long, but those are very dense 4 sentences. There's a lot of information in them. 1 paragraph description of a research hypothesis that you would like to test. Please see the course schedule for the due dates and the document on Blackboard for details and instructions. I will go over this document shortly. And then research proposals. You will write 2 proposals by the end of the semester. Each proposal will be a concise 2-page, double-spaced, really that means it's 1 page, paper for which you will elaborate one of your hypotheses. Again, see the course schedule and see that outline for instructions on how to complete the proposals. Then there is extra credit in this class. Now, how much is available depends on the semester. You can earn this by participating in extra research. So I said that you have to complete 2 online and 2 lab studies. You can also complete an additional online study or an additional lab study if it's available, and each one that you complete beyond the required amount, you will get 1 extra credit on your final grade. And I want to repeat that, on your final grade, not on an exam. That's quite a bit of extra credit. So please consider this if you're worried about, if you're getting a C and you want a B, or, hopefully you're getting an F and you want a D. Consider that this is something at your disposal. So grade calculation, again, everything in Blackboard calculates correctly. Class expectations. Blackboard, make sure you have access to it, all right? Clearly. Where do you start? I've already explained this to you, but one thing I want to highlight is be sure to check your email frequently. And if you are not in the habit of checking your USC account, make sure to link your USC email address to your personal email address, or somehow connect it in a way where you get notified when you get emails, or just so you get in the habit of checking for emails. This is how I will communicate with you. And if you miss one of my emails, that's not a good excuse. So please make sure that you are checking. Research participation, just so you already know. Course schedule, you know that. It's at the end of the syllabus, but also on Blackboard. Academic conduct, please act in a manner that promotes academic integrity. Really the big thing here, and I want to jump down to this point, the really big thing you have to worry about is plagiarism. I think plagiarism is getting a lot easier to do, unfortunately, even accidentally, where you pass off other people's work as if it were your own. Now, I think a lot of people know to avoid this, but especially with the instances of using artificial intelligence, which is a tool that's available to you. I don't stop anyone from using it. I think this class is designed in such a way that you can use AI and you won't get a significant advantage anyway. But it is possible to use AI, use something like ChatGPT, and if it produces some lines of text for you, and it is taken from somewhere else on the internet, is plagiarized, is stolen from somewhere else on the internet, and then that gets flagged as having been written by someone else, that will count as plagiarism. And that has very severe consequences. And usually the least, the lesser offense is that you fail the class. The worst offense is that you get expelled from the university. So please be careful about plagiarism and be careful about using AI. I give some advice for how to think about using AI in your coursework if you decide to do that for really any class. But please be careful of that. Adding or dropping a class. You can go through the office of the registrar. If you have a disability that you need accommodated, please let me know. Contact me, and then also contact Disability Support Services, and they should be able to help you out. All right. This is that course schedule that I've already gone over. Nothing new here. And then if you're interested in how grades get converted for the university system, so at the very end of the semester, you're going to get a letter grade rather than the number. This is how that's done. So there you go. All right. I also would like to go over this research hypotheses and proposals outline. Again, this is uploaded to Blackboard. It is underneath hypotheses and research proposals, that tag in Blackboard. I want to read this introductory paragraph, and then I want to just kind of open this document and let you peruse it at your own time to understand how these assignments are going to go. I will be covering in more detail what you need to do for these hypothesis assignments in the Chapter 2 introduction. But here's what I'd like to read. So humans form beliefs about what is true and what is not. We form these beliefs by observing the world, detecting associations, and using this knowledge to make decisions. Now, brains are well designed to detect and record patterns, but sometimes we detect and record patterns that aren't real. We believe things that seem true, but are not. To overcome this problem, we have developed the scientific method, a procedure for assessing a belief's veracity, its truthfulness. For this class, you will practice using the scientific method to examine several beliefs that you have about the human mind and the behavior it produces. Over the course of the semester, you will write 4 scientific psychological research hypotheses and 2 research proposals. A research hypothesis is a tentative statement or prediction about the relationship between 2 things, or what I will be calling variables, an independent and a dependent variable. For example, you may believe that a person's political beliefs, such as being Republican, Democrat, or independent, is somehow related to their willingness to wear a mask during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, though this answer to the question might seem obvious to you, you can't be certain that your belief is true without evidence. So each research proposal will be an opportunity to take one of your hypotheses, these things that you predict that you believe are true, and then design an experiment to test it. Descriptions for each assignment begin on the next page. Please be mindful of the due dates, which appear on that course schedule, and each assignment should be submitted in Blackboard. Make sure that you follow these formatting guidelines for submission. And then, as you go to complete these assignments, read through the outline for each. So there's a hypothesis outline, which tells you how to do the hypotheses, and then separately there's the research proposal outline. Read through this. If you have questions after seeing the Chapter 2 introductory video, please contact me, and of course I am happy to meet and help you with these assignments. All right, so that's that. Again, back to our PowerPoint. I think we've gone just about over everything that you need to do, that need to know to succeed in this class. A few other bits of information. As you watch the other recorded lectures, I want to note how I organize my slides, because this will help you organize your notes for studying later. At the very top of every slide, you're going to see a section header. And this is a header that's going to be there for as long as we are talking about that particular topic. So in the first lecture, we're going to talk about history. I will have several slides dedicated to simply presenting different aspects of history. Underneath that, the first bullet point will be a major idea or topic. Then anything that is indented underneath that particular heading is going to belong within that heading. So for example, we'll talk about psychoanalysis and Freud. Those 2 points, that Freud is known for a lot of things, the unconscious and early life experiences, each of those belongs under psychoanalysis. Likewise, when it says processes in the mind which occur automatically, or thought processes, memories, interests, and motivations, those belong underneath unconscious. So each of those are describing unconscious. So you should be, as you're taking notes for this class, which you should do, as you're taking notes for this class to study later, I recommend organizing your notes in this way. Also, I'll be using examples a lot. What I'll do is I will give you a definition of something, I'll explain it a little bit, and then I will usually relate it to something that you already know, or something that is much more, that is not technical. When I mention these examples, write them down. They will not usually appear on the slides, so make a note of them so that later when you're looking at your notes, you go, geez, psychoanalysis, what was that? And then you see that you wrote down an example that I gave, and you can say, yes, of course, I remember that example. That helps me remember what psychoanalysis is. So organize your notes in this way, write down the examples that I use. All right, so what are we going to cover in this class? We're going to talk about some pretty difficult subjects. I want to warn everyone of that. We're going to talk about psychological disorders later in the class. We'll talk about drug use and abuse. We'll talk about sexuality simply because this is my area of research and I think extensively about relationships, sexuality, etc. We'll talk about consciousness, what it means to be a conscious organism. And related to that, we'll talk a little bit about whether humans have free will or not, whether we are, in many ways, like a squishy computer. What features of our nervous system and the way that our brain and our nervous system works, how does that mirror what a computer does? What are the similarities? And of course, what are the differences? Because we are not just computers, but we do share a lot of features with them. Before we can get to this really juicy stuff, though, we gotta go over the basics. And that makes it sound like this isn't juicy. It is. What I want to do in the first chapter is go over how psychology is a science and why it needs to be a science. What does it mean for something to be a scientific study of the mind relative to other styles of knowing or generating knowledge? We need to start there, and that's going to be where we take off. So again, that's all for the introduction. Move on to the next set of videos, and if you have questions, of course, contact me. Thanks, everybody.